Hello everyone, and welcome back to my channel. I'd love it if you could leave a comment letting me know where you're listening from around the world. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying this video. Story 1. I've been babysitting since I was 16, and I thought I'd seen it all. Kids throwing tantrums, dogs that wouldn't stop barking, power outages that turned into flashlight adventures. But nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared me for the night I watched the Palmer kids. It was a quiet October evening, just chilly enough that the wind had a bite to it. The Palmer house was one of those suburban homes that looked cozy from the outside. 2 stories, big backyard, and a patio with wide glass doors. The kind of place you'd see in a real estate ad, where the lighting is always perfect and everything looks warm and inviting. The Palmers had 2 kids, Ethan, 7, and Lily, 4. Sweet kids. Ethan was obsessed with dinosaurs, and Lily carried around a tattered stuffed rabbit that she called Mr. Hops. Their parents left at 7 p.m., promising to be back by midnight. Help yourself to anything in the fridge, Mrs. Palmer had said, grabbing her coat. And if they give you trouble, Mr. Palmer added with a grin, threatened to take away their iPad. Works like a charm. I laughed, waved them off, and locked the door behind them. The first couple of hours were normal. I made the kids mac and cheese, let them watch an episode of their favorite cartoon, then tucked them into bed. Ethan asked for a bedtime story, so I read him Where the Wild Things Are. Lily was already half asleep, clutching Mr. Hops like a lifeline. By 9 p.m., the house was quiet. I settled onto the couch with a blanket, flipped on the TV, and scrolled through my phone. That's when I saw it. A figure, outside, standing beyond the glass doors. At first, I thought I was seeing things, maybe the reflection of a lamp or a weird shadow from the backyard trees. But as my eyes adjusted, my stomach twisted into a cold knot. It was a man, tall, bald, dressed in a dark hoodie. He was just standing there, motionless, staring at me. My first instinct was to pretend I hadn't seen him. If I ignored him, maybe he'd just leave. My fingers clenched around my phone, my mind racing. Should I call Mr. Palmer? The police? Was this some kind of sick prank? I swallowed hard and glanced back at the glass doors. He was closer now, his face nearly pressed against the glass, and he was smiling. I jerked upright so fast my phone slid off my lap and hit the floor with a dull thud. The sound made me flinch, but the man didn't react. He just stood there, that eerie grin plastered across his face. His teeth were unnaturally white in the dim porch light. I scrambled for my phone and called Mr. Palmer. It rang, and rang, and rang. No answer. Shit, I was breathing too fast, my heartbeat hammering in my ears. I told myself to calm down. Maybe it was a neighbor who got the wrong house. Maybe a drunk guy wandering home. I looked again. He was gone. I let out a shaky breath. Maybe I had imagined it. Maybe my mind was playing tricks on me. Then, tap, tap, tap. I froze. The sound was soft, deliberate, coming from the glass doors. My stomach clenched. Slowly, I turned my head. He was back, closer than before. His hand, pale and bony, was pressed against the glass. His grin had widened, stretching across his face like something carved into his skin. I grabbed the baseball bat that Mr. Palmer kept by the stairs. My hands were slick with sweat. I backed away, heart slamming against my ribs. That's when I remember the kids. I sprinted up the stairs, two at a time, and locked both their bedroom doors. Ethan stirred in his sleep as I peeked in, but he didn't wake up. I stood in the hallway, clutching the bat, trying to steady my breathing. The house was silent, too silent. Then the sound of the patio door sliding open. I nearly dropped the bat. I had locked that door. I was sure I had locked it. A floorboard creaked downstairs. I pressed my back against the wall, swallowing a scream. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. Then, the sound of a car pulling into the driveway. Headlights washed over the house. A door slammed. Footsteps. I heard the front door open, and then silence. Mrs. Palmer's voice cut through the stillness. "Hello." I almost collapsed. I ran down the stairs, breath hitching in my throat. The Palmers were standing in the foyer, looking confused. I turned to the glass doors. The patio was empty. I told them everything. Mr. Palmer's face darkened as he grabbed a flashlight and stepped outside. He searched the yard, the patio, even the tree line at the edge of the property. Nothing, except for the footprints leading into the woods. The police came, but they found nothing. No forced entry, no sign of the man. They said he was probably a drifter, someone passing through, that I was lucky he hadn't tried to break in. A week later, Mrs. Palmer texted me. They had installed security cameras. That night, the cameras caught him again, standing at the glass doors, watching. They moved out 2 months later. I never babysat again. Story 2. Babysitting has always been easy money for me. Kids sleep. I scroll through my phone, eat some snacks, and get paid. Simple. At least, that's what I thought before the night at Thompson's house. They were a nice couple, well off, polite, and maybe a little too perfect. Their baby, Lily, was the easiest kid I had ever watched. She barely fussed, hardly ever cried, and fell asleep within minutes of being rocked. She was 8 months old, with big blue eyes that followed you around the room like she understood more than a baby should. But I never thought much about that. The Thompsons left at 7 p.m., giving me the usual rundown. Bottles in the fridge, diapers in the drawer, emergency numbers on the counter. They kissed Lily goodnight, and she went down without a peep. By 11 p.m., I was lounging on their couch, aimlessly scrolling on my phone. The house was silent except for the soft hum of the baby monitor on the coffee table beside me. That's when I heard it, a baby crying. I glanced at the monitor, expecting to see Lily stirring in her crib, but the screen was dark. I frowned, turned up the volume. The crying grew louder, high-pitched and desperate. I pushed myself off the couch and hurried upstairs. Lily's nursery door was cracked open, just as I had left it. I peeked inside. She was sound asleep. Her tiny body rose and fell in perfect rhythm, her lips slightly parted, her stuffed bunny tucked under her chubby arm. The sound of crying had stopped the moment I entered the room. My stomach did a weird little flip, but I brushed it off. Maybe I was imagining things. Maybe the monitor had picked up a sound from outside. I went back downstairs, settled in, and exhaled. Then it started again, crying, not from upstairs, from the baby monitor. My breath caught in my throat. My fingers trembled as I grabbed the monitor and turned up the volume. The cries were louder this time, heart-wrenching, gasping sobs like an infant in pain. My body stiffened as the cries shifted into something else. A whisper, "Help me." I nearly dropped the monitor. A jolt of cold shot up my spine. The screen was still dark, black, empty, like a void. But then, Just for a second, the monitor flickered on. I saw something. Not Lily. A shape. A shadow standing in the farthest corner of the room, just beyond the crib. Tall. Motionless. Watching. The screen cut back to black. I shot up from the couch, so fast I nearly tripped. My heart hammered against my ribs as I sprinted up the stairs. I threw the nursery door open. Nothing. Lily was still sleeping, her little fingers twitching in a dream. The room was warm and still, the soft glow of the nightlight casting harmless shapes against the walls. But I wasn't convinced. I checked under the crib. Nothing. The closet. Empty. Every inch of the room was normal. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something had just been here. I stood there for a long time, gripping the doorknob, listening to the silence. Then, with a deep breath, I backed out and shut the door. I stayed awake on the couch until the Thompsons came home around 1 a.m. When they walked in, they noticed my pale face right away. Mrs. Thompson tilted her head. Everything okay? I hesitated, but then I told them. The crying, the whisper, the shadow in the room. I expected them to laugh it off or tell me the monitor was just glitching. Instead, Mrs. Thompson went pale. Her husband placed a hand on her back as she sank onto the couch. For a long moment, she said nothing, just stared at me, wide-eyed, lips trembling. Then, finally she spoke. "I never told anyone," she whispered. "We lost our first baby in that room." A cold chill ran down my spine. "Stillborn," Mr. Thompson murmured. "At 8 months." I couldn't speak. I just sat there as Mrs. Thompson buried her face in her hands and sobbed. The next morning, they removed the baby monitor. The crying never returned. Story 3. I used to babysit for a single mom, Ms. Reynolds, and her 6-year-old son, Max. It wasn't a bad gig. Quiet neighborhood, easy kid, decent pay. Ms. Reynolds worked late shifts at the hospital, which meant I was usually alone in the house after Max went to sleep. I never minded, until the night that changed everything. It was late October, the air crisp, the wind rattling the old oak in the backyard. The kind of night that makes everything feel just a little off. Max had been his usual energetic self. Cartoons before bed, 1 extra glass of water, the usual stall tactics. But by 9:30, he was out, curled up with his stuffed dinosaur, breathing slow and steady. I went downstairs, plopped onto the couch, and started scrolling through my phone. Then I heard him talking. It was faint at first, just a low murmur. I almost ignored it, thinking he was talking in his sleep. But then I heard something else. A pause, then a whisper. He was answering someone. I got up, feeling a strange tightness in my chest. Maybe it was just a dream, I told myself. Kids sleep talk all the time. I climbed the stairs quietly, my heart picking up speed with each step. The hallway was dark, the only light coming from the crack beneath Max's door. I hesitated before pushing it open. Max was sitting up in bed, covers pulled around his waist, his small hands gripping his stuffed dinosaur. His eyes were wide, locked on the open doorway. I followed his gaze to the empty hall. "What's wrong, buddy?" I asked, keeping my voice soft. His lip trembled. "Mommy's home." I felt a sharp prick of cold at the base of my spine. Max wasn't lying. He wasn't trying to scare me. He was 6. He believed it. I swallowed hard. "No, sweetheart. Mommy's still at work." He shook his head. his little fingers tightening around his dinosaur. She's outside. My breath caught. We're outside, I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Max lifted his arm and pointed to the window. I turned slowly, my stomach twisting into knots. The blinds were half open, and beyond them, the backyard stretched out into darkness. The wind rattled the trees, and for a second, I almost convinced myself it was nothing. And then I saw her, a woman, standing in the shadows, just beyond the tree line. She didn't move, didn't fidget, didn't shift from one foot to the other like a normal person. She just stood there. Her hair hung in long, tangled strands over her shoulders. Her dress was pale, almost white, torn at the hem as if she'd been walking through thorns. I couldn't see her face, but I could feel her eyes on me. A cold sweat broke out on my back. My legs felt frozen, but somehow I moved, grabbing Max and lifting him off the bed. We're going downstairs. I told him, try to keep my voice steady. He didn't argue, just wrapped his arms around my neck as I carried him out of the room. I flicked on every light as I went. The kitchen, the living room, every single one. The bright artificial glow made me feel safer, but my hand still trembled as I grabbed my phone. I checked the window again. She hadn't moved. I dialed 911, my fingers slick with sweat. I need someone here now, I whispered, keeping my voice low so Max wouldn't hear the fear in it. What's the emergency? The dispatcher asked. There's a woman in the backyard, just standing there, watching the house. Can you describe her? I glanced back at the window. She was gone. My stomach dropped. The wind howled outside, and for a moment, I thought maybe I'd imagined her. Maybe it was just a trick of the light. Then Max whispered, she's knocking. A sharp, slow tap echoed from the back door. My throat clenched. I turned toward the kitchen, toward the glass sliding door that led to the backyard. The blinds were pulled down, but I could see the shadow behind them. Tall, still, waiting. I stepped back, gripping Max tighter. The police are coming, I called out, my voice shaking. Silence. Then tap, tap, tap. I held my breath. A minute passed, then another. Then the distant wail of sirens cut through the night. By the time the officers arrived, she was gone. They searched the yard. Nothing. No footprints in the damp grass. No sign anyone had been there at all. When Ms. Reynolds got home, I told her everything. Her face went pale. She didn't ask if I was sure, didn't laugh it off or tell me I was imagining things. Instead, she went to a drawer in the living room, pulled out an old photo album, and flipped through it with trembling fingers. Then she stopped. She turned the album toward me, and there she was, the woman from the backyard, the long hair, the pale dress. My mother, Ms. Reynolds whispered. Her voice was tight, like she could barely force the words out. She died 10 years ago. I felt a cold chill creep up my spine. Max never mentioned her again, and I never set foot in that house again.